All right, everybody. I'm obviously Jesus. Welcome to the first Patreon video of July 2019. It is very, very late. It is almost halfway through the month. I may end up having to do, just a debate recap of the next Democratic debates, which are going to be held on July 30th and 31st. I will condense them into one video. I won't milk it for two this time. But as always, please do feel free to leave me your suggestions for new videos in the description. It helps me out so much because my brain is locked in a certain way usually in most senses, at least when it comes to thinking about new ideas for the Patreon. So it's always extremely helpful to have other people who are thinking in different ways and just vastly different people than me come up with ideas for what I could talk about in a Patreon video. So please just be as liberal as you want. There's no judgment, even if I don't make a video about it. I mean, I guess that is technically a form of judgment, but I'm not gonna think you're stupid or what have you. But if you ever want to hear me talk about something, please just throw that in the comments of the Patreon post or one of the YouTube videos or something like that. But anyway, I'm obviously Jesus. Let me take one quick second here and turn on the noise gate so you don't hear the whirring of the fans or what have you in the back of my room. But today's video actually has something to do with the reason why my videos are sort of slipping behind, which is because I think I hinted in a previous video or a previous post, I have found myself in a new relationship, which is something that is obviously, if you're even a short-term or shorter-term subscriber of this Patreon, is a pretty significant thing for me. I've spoken at length in the past about my previous relationship, not necessarily in terms of the actual details of that relationship, but in terms of how I feel and how it has sort of haunted me as a trauma, and I've sort of been attached to the idea of that relationship and trying to repair that, and the guilt that came from losing that relationship and precipitating its end, essentially. I've talked, like I said, at great length about those things, and this video is going to be talking about not my new relationship. I'm a very private person, and I would certainly never want anyone revealing specific details of a relationship that I'm in, or about about me or about us to somebody else, even if it's to a fairly small audience, and even if it's part of some project like that. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to talk about essentially making a response to a video I made last year, I believe, called something about moving on. I honestly cannot think of the exact title of the video. I'll try to remember to link that in the body of the Patreon post. But yeah, I want to talk mostly off the cuff. There are some notes that I have here, but for those of you who are at the enthusiast here, it's not going to be nearly as detailed as usual. So I'm going to sort of go back to the glory days of freeballing it here, and hopefully it will turn out into a good thing. Also, because of the time constraints, this is the last of the clerical stuff and the meta stuff, by the way, I promise. But because of the increased time that I've been spending not only with this relationship but with the photography and stuff like that I've mentioned previously as well, I am thinking of trying to cut down to making somewhat shorter videos, maybe in the 15-minute range rather than the crazy 25+ minute range that I often get to. So I may need to do that, and that's just something that will happen, although I'm still going to stick to 4 videos a month because I don't think that will be too hard, and I would hope that, again, I would get suggestions. But anyway, I'm not going to be talking about the specifics of my new relationship or even the specifics of my old relationships. I'm basically going to be talking about my thoughts on being essentially wrong and having to admit that I've been wrong for many, many years now, essentially, about moving on, and how I resisted it for such a long time, much like I resisted taking psychiatric medication as well for such a long time. But I resisted both of those things, and it turns out that on a long enough time scale, when you resist something like that, there is a chance, and it has happened in my case, that those things wind up being the wrong decision. The resisting winds up being the wrong decision, that is. But yeah, let's talk about that. For the past 6 years since my previous relationship dissolved, and I've been dealing with the repercussions of that, emotionally, I often, I just basically, after the initial trauma of that relationship and the grief and, going through that, around 2015 or somewhere in there, I was able to reach a solid stage, essentially, of just feeling okay. I was able to reach, I never felt great, really, for more than 2 seconds, or I can't even really think of a context in which I would have felt great at that time. But after a couple of years had passed and the grief had sort of solidified in my brain, I essentially had to take stock of my life and figure out what the hell I was going to do now. And I essentially, as I've said in previous videos, I essentially opted to make a conscious choice to not pursue any new relationships because I wanted, for a myriad of reasons, to fix the old one. And I think that, there were reasons that I wanted to go back, and there were reasons that I didn't want to go forward. As for reasons why I wanted to go back, it was, textbook shit, like basically, the guilt of having, played a major part in the dissolution of the previous relationship, the just the general feeling of loss. That's all pretty bog standard, essentially, as they say. But as far as my reticence to go forward and actively pursue anything, that gets a little bit more murky. Oftentimes, it's not like people were, falling at my door or anything, but oftentimes I didn't believe that I deserved love based on, how I had helped destroy my previous relationship. And moreover, more so even than that, I didn't believe that I was ever likely, even just on a practical basis, to find someone who would love me, because for that whole period of time, and still now to a lesser degree, but I'm not a person who has a very, very high sense of self-esteem. I don't like my appearance. I have, major hang-ups about, getting into a new relationship because of my low income, my history with, depression and anxiety and things like that. So, even on a practical level, I just felt that, I really didn't have a whole hell of a lot of options. And I'm not a person who believes in soulmates. Maybe I can make a video about that or something, but it's not really that hard. I mean, the idea of a soulmate that you have, that you even have a soul is a crazy idea. But even if you believe in that or believe in something similar to that, the idea that out of 7, almost 8 billion people soon enough, there's only literally one person that is meant for you in your life, that is just that's not how math work, fam. As the kids say. But I don't believe in soulmates, but the idea that I was going to find someone who was attracted to me, didn't care about my lack of education and lack of interest in resuming my education, didn't care about my income, didn't care about any, I didn't have any hang-ups regarding my mental illness. There were just so many different filters on all the different people in the world that I felt like the chances of me actually meeting one of the few people in the world who would actually pass all those filters, in addition to things that I've come to soften on over the years, like, drinking and doing drugs. Like, I once thought I would never drink or never, I do drink occasionally, very, very infrequently, and never to excess. But, back in the day, I thought that I would have to also filter out all the people who drank alcohol, did any kind of drugs. Still wouldn't want to date anybody who smoked, but that's not an issue now. But, there were just so many filters, is the point, that I thought would essentially effectively, even if it's not theoretical, it would just effectively and practically prevent me from finding a new relationship. So that was what I was worried about. And I, took that and said, well, we take these filters, we take the low chances of me finding someone who will accept me. You compound that with the desire to resume my previous relationship that I had for so long, and just the fact of the guilt and the trauma, you get a pretty compelling recipe for not moving on with your life. But, let's talk about very briefly that previous relationship. There's probably some, I honestly don't know how to answer this question at this point. I'm still kind of in flux on it, but I think that maybe there probably is some element of love left in that relationship. And certainly there's, I feel like the longing has gone away. Not only because of a new relationship, but also just because it's hard to long for someone, even, after so much time has passed, that you don't really remember what it's like to be in their presence, really, in any kind of vivid way, or, what they even sound like or what they look like, and you don't know what they look like now. It's hard to really remember. As the memory fades, it becomes, you can still hold love in your heart for them to some degree, but it's hard to long for someone when you have to acknowledge that they have probably changed so much and your memory is just failing you, in terms of your ability to even remember what it's like to be with them. And you know, in the earlier years, I would occasionally get some kind of flash of that in dreams, but even then it wasn't very specific. It was all conceptual. It was, I could feel that my brain was just filling in the gaps, and the gaps only got, you know, larger and larger as time went on. But truthfully, I was holding on to something that was outdated. Like I said, you know, what I remembered became less and less relevant to who my ex, you know, is now and was as time went on. And it was also something that was completely unserving to me, to write off the idea of having anything new and just stay stuck on something in the past. And that's kind of hard for me to say because I never thought I would hear myself say it, but in the end it was true. I wouldn't say it was self-destructive quite, because, you know, being totally without hope for any length of time would probably have been far more, you know, self-destructive and led to some suicidal impulses that I was able to avoid simply by saying, I'm going to do whatever I can to get this relationship back on track, even if it, you know, even as it becomes more and more unlikely as time goes on and the distance between us and the gap of experiences becomes much greater. So, you know, I do think that in a way it was a form of self-preservation, certainly, to, you know, process the trauma and also maintain the illusion or maintain the faint hope that I was ever going to salvage anything from that relationship, or get it back on track, as I said. But so I don't think it was directly harmful, but it also wasn't doing anything actively good for me. So essentially, I just stood still, in effect, for years and years of my life. And, you know, the years that people sometimes consider to be the best years of their life. I don't know how I'll look back on that. I mean, my best years of my life was probably fucking when I was like 1. And I don't remember anything, and I probably didn't know what the fuck was going on at any point in time. So that was probably the best year of my life. But, yeah, I wasted a lot of time as an adult. I mean, I don't know that I would have been happy, especially getting back out there, as the kids say, so soon. Like if I had just, you know, somehow processed this a lot faster in the typical grieving period of like 3 to 6 months and gotten myself out there. I mean, I guess if I had processed it truly, I might have been, but I don't think that, you know, trying to force myself to go back out there, when my natural grieving process, which is extremely fucking long, clearly, had not completed. I don't think getting back out there and forcing myself to, you know, mime it would have led to anything good. So, like I said, it wasn't harming me actively, but I was also not actively doing anything good for myself. So it was kind of just a big stasis in my life, a big standstill. And the time has yet to tell. Hindsight has yet to tell how I truly feel about being in stasis for that long. Although for now, I have to say that, you know, it kept me in stasis just long enough to meet a person that I would ultimately, you know, be surprised to learn past those filters. And because it wasn't self-destructive and also not self-reconstructive, though, it did provide me at that sort of baseline level a kind of odd stability, I would say, that you know, for, you know, that period of like 2015, 16, all the way to 2019 in the current year, it allowed me to build myself up in other ways for reemergence. It gave me, maybe it's not the healthiest thing. I'm certain most psychologists and psychiatrists would say that it's not, but it did give me a place to hang on to and not slip into after the first initial, you know, trauma. After that had passed, I very quickly, you know, had a place to hang on to and not slip into suicidal depression and not go as low as I know I could have gone, certainly. It was really bad at the beginning, of course, back in like 2013, 14, but after that, the past few years have allowed me to have that kind of weird, you know, unique to me stability that has allowed me to continue and be all right and build myself up, like I said, for some kind of reemergence. You know, what has truly surprised me is, though, about this new relationship is the fact that I would not, if offered, ditch this to go back to my old relationship, which is something I never thought I would hear myself say. I always thought that I would prefer the chance to rectify this horrific trauma and loss to clinging on to any new thing that I might acquire, or not acquire, that's kind of a possessive and cold term, but any new thing I might, you know, share any new I don't know what the terminology I'm trying to grasp at here is, but I always thought that I would always prefer to go back to an older relationship rather than have a new one, even if the new one seemed all right, because I always thought the trauma of the old one would just be so tempting to reconcile. But that's part of the things that's just surprising me the most. I talk about a reemergence. It's like literally in an emotional way coming out of a chrysalis. Because for years and years, to keep myself sane, to keep myself in that kind of weird stability, I had to say, oh yeah, there's nothing better than this. There's nothing better than the idea of going back to that old relationship. But given just the tiniest nudge, I come out of the chrysalis and I realize that for quite some time, I've been just fighting. I've been ready for something else, and I've just been fighting the admission of that to myself and to anybody else. So I'm not a person who often deceives himself. I mean, I had an inkling of this for several years now. I had an inkling that, when I first kissed somebody else, which happened several years ago after the dissolution of my last big relationship. When I first kissed somebody else, I was like, I had to say, oh, well, that wasn't rotten. I didn't immediately break into, tears and start crying about being unfaithful with my ex who hasn't talked to me in ages. So I had the idea in my head, but I was still of two minds about that. And now I am fully of the newer mind, of the more developed mind, and it is really refreshing. Like I said, it's crazy to hear myself say that I would not drop any new relationship to go back and have the chance to reconcile this big juicy hunk of trauma that I would, I always thought I would just have in my life forever, and it probably will be in my life forever, but it's so much more distant now, and it just has taken me so long to take the rose-colored lenses off and say, oh, that big fucking juicy hunk of trauma has actually been quite far away from me for some time now. I thought I could never trust again. I thought I could never share parts of myself again, like, my YouTube videos and stuff like that. I thought I could never, just from a practical standpoint, take my shirt off in front of someone again. But I was spectacularly wrong. I never thought, maybe it just goes hand in hand with the fact that I never thought I would meet someone who would even want to go anywhere near that far with me. But it really just goes to show that I was ready. I was ready. All I needed to do was suspend my disbelief and place myself and allow myself to enter a context where that would happen. And I find myself now ready to sign up for it all again. And, naturally I'm worried, but I'm also overjoyed. So, yeah. If my ex called me, which she never would do, but if my ex were to call me and say I wanted to talk, I would listen to what she had to say, certainly. It's not like I hate her or wouldn't want to talk to a person who has with whom I have some major thing between us. I'd still listen to what she had to say, certainly. But even if she said, I will marry you right now if you just come to me, I honestly would have to decline. I would not ditch what I have now and go running back to her, even if the offer was that blind and tantalizing to my old self. And it's shocking to hear myself say that, but I was wrong. I was wrong about myself. I was kidding myself about the depths of my devotion, I guess, to this long dead concept of this relationship. And I do. No matter how I dress it up, it really is me saying that I was on some level deceiving myself, which I don't like because, I do pride myself on being a person who knows himself and doesn't really hide or war with himself. But I suppose that on things like this that are associated with trauma, even fairly, even people unfettered with, war in their own mind can still fall into the trap of doing that, even if it's not something frequently. And honestly, over the years, I have, like I said, I've essentially been kidding myself and operating as if I were of one mind, but over the years, I have become able to see my ex's flaws a little more clearly. I think I've talked about them before here as well. Her elitism regarding my disinterest in education and, being ashamed of me and not wanting to, tell her friends that we were dating because, and dressing it up under the guise of, oh, I don't want to be compared. And it really was just that, she didn't want to hold me out to the world, and that hurt. And it's something that I reluctantly forgave for a long time, and I guess I still forgive, but now I don't have to dwell on it. I don't have to think that the only hope of my life turning around is someone whom I'll have to forgive for something that is fairly egregious, being ashamed of your partner, telling them you love them, and then turning around and for no other reason but the fact that you're embarrassed because of their essentially credentials, denying them the ability to really be integrated in your life. And that fucking is kind of freeing to not have to do mental gymnastics to reconcile why I would want to be with a person like that. And she also said, I think I mentioned this before too, but we can rehash it. She also said that my attractiveness crept up on her, which is kind of like a backhanded compliment, I guess. But I mean, my partner now, she tells me that I'm really handsome and hot, and it sounds comical. I know it sounds comical to me most of all, but it's unequivocal, and it feels really nice to have that and not have a person like half compliment you. And just from the little to the small, it really is refreshing to have something that is uncomplicated in that way and feels a lot more genuine and a lot less restrictive, or a lot less, I don't know what the word is. Restrictive is not quite the word. The word is restrained. Like, it doesn't feel like she's restraining herself or restraining how much I can be in her life, essentially. Like, certainly not to the degree my ex did. I don't want to paint my new thing as a perfect, flawless thing, because it isn't. Nothing really is. But it's definitely liberating to not have the same old problems, I guess. And maybe my ex and I could have solved those problems, but she didn't show any willingness to, and didn't even show any willingness to begin solving those problems. So, you know what? As callous as it is, I think that maybe the best outcome is for me to say, well, sorry, your loss. I'm never going to want to be alone. I'm never going to want to be single, really. I mean, I can be okay. I think it's important to be okay being single, to not have your life fall apart at the end of a relationship, which is not something I succeeded at in the past. But I also think it's equally okay to say that, I can be okay while single, but, it's not how I really want to live my life, because at the end of the day, having a whole other person and sharing your life with them is an unparalleled human experience. Like, to share your life, you can add things to your life. You can have, friends, you can have this, that, and the other thing. You can have friends, material objects, whatever. But the experience of really, truly becoming intimate, emotionally intimate, not necessarily just sexually intimate, but the experience of becoming emotionally intimate with somebody else and sharing your life with them on a level that is not found anywhere else in your life, that is unparalleled. You can't give that to yourself, because part of it is tied to the fact that there is another whole ass human being who wants to share in that life with you, and it goes from person to person. It's reciprocal. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's one of the most unique human experiences, if you ask me. Like I said, it's perfectly fine. You probably should be perfectly fine, being single and not have your life fall apart. But you also shouldn't have to pretend that, if a relationship breaks up, that, oh, I'm just as fine as I was yesterday before the relationship broke up, because it should be a big thing to you. But because, like I said, it's a whole ass other fucking human being that is sharing in your life with you, and that is truly fucking majestic. I'm not saying you have to be like codependent and like only live around each other either. There's just something that is I think it seemed right or more desirable to me when I was younger because I always felt so vulnerable and mistreated by the world and my parents and everybody else that I tried to love. So I tried to like glom on to anyone who showed me the tiniest ounce of love and the desire to be with me on a romantic level. But yeah, you don't have to be codependent. You can be interdependent. You're still your own people, but you're also a unit together. It's like molecules and atoms. Atoms are still individuals, but they can also come together and form something better. I'm sort of badly paraphrasing what my therapist tells me all the time, but I do think that over the past few years from talking to him and just living my life and getting a little bit older and being more willing to see my flaws, that I do have a better idea of what relationships ought to be. And I do find myself feeling the vestiges, the leftovers of my previous bad, just self-destructive, not great for relationship desires, but I find it fairly easy to curtail them and be a little bit more objective and step back. And I don't know if that's the medication that I take, which is not a whole hell of a lot of medication, but I honestly think that maybe this is just me tooting my own horn, but I do think that's just me becoming a more introspective person. But yeah, I'm never going to want to be alone. But while I was alone, even though I was hanging on to something, I was able to grow stronger, even as I chose to hope for the past rather than actively hope for the future. It didn't hinder my personal development, which, despite my unconventional path, is the important part. It did not hinder my personal development. I was able to grow, my photography stuff, my own understanding, as I just said. I was able to grow even if I had a weird circuitous route to it. I almost said route, whatever. Either one is fine. I do worry that, like I said, this isn't perfect. I do worry that I will wind up having, more trust issues than before. In a way, sticking my neck out after this long and knowing what can happen when you stick your neck out in this way. It does bring a degree of risk and pressure that I definitely feel and acknowledge. There is a new type or a type of unknown in my life that I am feeling now in this new relationship that I haven't felt in a while. Although my therapist, one of his favorite things to say is that, one of the most important things in life is to learn to tolerate ambiguity. So trying to work on that, trying to put my my trust in that process of tolerating ambiguity, because it is true that in associating with another whole ass person and having the potential and sharing that wonderful experience of having a life lived not purely by yourself, in doing that, you always introduce a variable that wasn't there before. So I can be objective, thankfully, now and say, oh, well, these are things. Technically there is pressure. Technically there is risk. Technically there are hazards that I'm going to have to brave that I wouldn't have to if I had stayed alone. But I think enough time has passed where I can truly feel fantastic about the positives that come with those, and most of the time, if not always, outweigh them. Or at least that's what I'll be saying until my worst case scenario brain is proven correct. But that can always happen. I'm not going to say that there's no chance of that happening, but I'm hoping that even if it's just by the virtue of me being 6 years older than I was and dating someone who is older than my partner was 6 years ago. I'm hoping that by being, older and mature adults and, my new partner being more psychologically sophisticated than my prior one who had never been to therapy until after she met me. Oh, isn't that sweet? But yeah, I do hope by virtue of all those things that we will be able to, say that, relationships are not easy. They are often hard. Sometimes they're easy, but, you do come to, not impasses, but you do come to junctures where you need to talk about things and perhaps seek the assistance of professionals. But I hope that by virtue of all those things I just mentioned, that it will be a gradual process as life in general is, and turn out pretty okay. There is like I said, a worst case scenario brain where I'm wondering that, if it's just safer to be alone, or if I'm going to fuck up because I've been alone for so long and I've forgotten how to function as part of a relationship. But I'm going to go forward with the knowledge that I am more acutely aware and able to manage my older flaws that ended my last relationship. And I'm going to rely on that It doesn't mean I won't make newer mistakes as well, but hopefully, and this comes down to not only me having gained stuff, but also having a partner who hopefully is more willing to talk about things. I'm just going to hope that we're able to, whenever we do come to any problems, major or minor, that we're able to talk about them rather than have it, blow up in our faces. So yeah, that's what I've been up to lately. That's my thoughts on essentially being wrong about moving on. It took me fucking dozens of times the average length of the normal human grief process, but you get there when you get there, and it's there is pretty good. As I've said before, my hope with this Patreon, more than anything else, especially when I talk about personal stuff like this, is that you can take from my life as a cautionary tale and learn along with me, and I hope this is one of those videos that accomplishes that goal and adds to that oeuvre, which will allow people to learn from my mistakes and my successes. Fingers fucking crossed. But yeah, your music recommendation for the week is by a band called Pix. I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe the album is called Small Mercies. It's got one of my favorite songs of the year thus far on it called Duck Out. That comes up to the rest, towards the end of the record, excuse me. But listen to the whole damn thing. It's a fucking fantastic little weird dark synth type deal. I don't know how to categorize it. I should probably stop trying with all my music recommendations for that matter. But yeah. I'll see you in the next video. I don't know when it's coming, but there will be 4 videos for July. Bye-bye.